The morning Marcus handed me a cardboard box and told me I had 72 hours to leave the house I grew up in. He was wearing our father's watch. I remember staring at that watch. A 1987 Rolex Submariner with a small scratch on the bezel from when Dad dropped it at my college graduation, and thinking he's already divided everything up before the funeral flowers even died. What Marcus didn't know, what nobody in my family knew, was that I had spent the previous 11 days sitting across from a woman named Patricia Nguyen, an estate litigation attorney at Hargrove & Kwon LLP in downtown Chicago, building a case that would unravel 15 years of carefully hidden documents. He handed me a box. I handed him a reckoning. This is the story of how I discovered that my parents' will wasn't just unfair. It was a forgery, and how a single appointment with a handwriting expert, a suspicious notary public timestamp, and one very quiet conversation in a courthouse hallway changed everything I thought I knew about my family. But to understand why that box felt like the end of everything, you need to go back. Not just to the day our parents died, but to the day I started being erased. My name is Vanessa Ortega Kane. I'm 34 years old. I grew up in a 4-bedroom house in Naperville, Illinois, the kind of suburb where everyone has a riding lawn mower and no one talks about money out loud. Even when money is the only thing anyone is actually thinking about. My parents, Robert and Diana Ortega Kane, were what you might politely call financially complicated. My father built a regional construction company, Ortega Kane Development Group, from a single pickup truck in 1989 into a firm that by 2078 was doing $4 million in annual revenue. My mother managed the household, managed the social calendar, and I would later learn, managed a great deal more than either of those things. My brother Marcus is 3 years older than me. He was always the one who got introduced first at dinner parties. He was the one who got the car at 16. He was the one who went to business school at Northwestern on a tuition check. My father wrote the same year I took out $600 in student loans for a state university 2 hours away. I told myself it was fine. Families have their dynamics. Not everything has to be equal. I said that to myself so many times it almost sounded true. What I didn't understand, not until I was sitting in Patricia Nguyen's office at 8:07 in the morning 11 days after my parents' car accident, was that it was never dynamics. It was a plan, and it had been running for a very long time. The accident happened on February 3rd of last year. Black ice on I-88. Both of them died at the scene. My father was 60 My mother was 64. I flew home from Denver, where I'd been living for 4 years, working as a senior project manager for a mid-size architecture firm. I had 2 carry-on bags, no return ticket, and a grief so large and so strange that I kept losing it and finding it again every few hours, like a coat I kept putting down. Marcus met me at O'Hare. He hugged me. He smelled like my father's aftershave, which made it worse. "We'll figure everything out," he said. I believed him. That was my first mistake. I moved back into my old bedroom. The house on Elmwood Drive, a F400 square foot Craftsman with a finished basement and a 3-car garage that my parents had paid off in 2009, felt hollow in a way I couldn't articulate. Like the furniture was all still there, but the air had been removed. Marcus was handling things, he said. He was in contact with the estate attorneys. He would let me know when things were settled. I was grieving, so I let him handle things. That was my second mistake. I should have known something was wrong when 11 days after the funeral, Marcus called me into the kitchen and set a manila folder on the table between us like he was presenting a business proposal. He was wearing a suit at 9 in the morning in our parents' kitchen. "I wanted you to hear this from me before the formal reading," he said. He pushed the folder toward me. I should have known when I noticed the folder was already open, like he'd rehearsed which page to have it on. I should have known when he sat across from me instead of next to me. The will, or the document in front of me that claimed to be the will, dated September 14, 2001, left the house, the business, all investment accounts, and the entirety of my parents' estate to Marcus James Ortega Kane, named as sole beneficiary and executor. The estate's rough valuation was now $15.2 million. There was a single line about me. To Vanessa Marie Ortega Kane, personal effects as selected by executor, plus the sum of $5,000 in recognition of her relationship with the family. In recognition of her relationship with the family. Like I was a neighbor who had been kind about taking in their mail. I read that line 4 times. I looked up at Marcus. He was watching me with an expression I can only describe as prepared. Not sorry, not uncomfortable, prepared. "I know it's a shock," he said. "Mom and Dad left me $25,000, I said. "They wanted the business to stay intact. They were worried about." $25,000. Vanessa. Marcus, My voice was very quiet. Where were you on September 14th, 2018? He stopped, and something moved across his face, just for a second, there and then gone, that I had never seen before in my brother. He looked caught. He recovered fast. I don't know, why would I remember? Because that's when this was supposedly signed. And I'm trying to remember if Mom ever mentioned changing the will. Because as recently as June of 2021, she told me directly that everything was going to be split equally between us. Marcus looked at the table. People change their minds, Vanessa, not our mother. He gave me 72 hours to clear out my belongings 3 days later, standing in the driveway with the box, Dad's watch on his wrist. I didn't cry in front of him. I loaded my 2 carry-on bags and the box into a rental car. I drove to a Hampton Inn off the highway. I sat on the edge of the bed in room He on 14, and I thought about my mother's voice on the phone in June. Everything split equal, V. That was always the plan. Always. And then I opened my laptop, and I started searching for estate litigation attorneys in Chicago. If you're watching this, and something about that kitchen scene is sitting in your stomach right now, that specific feeling of watching someone who should love you simply not, drop same in the comments. I read all of them. Every single one. Patricia Nguyen had a small office on the 14th floor of a building on West Monroe Street. She was 51 years old, wore no jewelry except for one thin gold band, and had a habit of writing on yellow legal pads in a handwriting so small I wondered how she could read it back. I told her everything I knew in 40 minutes. She wrote without looking up. When I finished, she put down her pen and said, "Do you have any documents your parents signed before 2020? Letters, cards, checks, anything with their signature." I had a birthday card from my mother from 2019. I had a check my father wrote me in 2018 for $3, a graduation gift, late, because he'd been traveling. And a holiday card from 2020 with both their signatures. Patricia looked at them for a long time. Then she looked at the will. She said, "In your mother's last name. See how it crosses left to right with a slight downward angle? That's a consistent feature in all 3 of these earlier documents." She tapped the will with one finger. In this one, it crosses right to left, slightly upward. I stared at it. "It's subtle," she said. "But handwriting analysis isn't about dramatic differences. It's about consistency. And this signature isn't consistent." She retained Dr. Alicia Fontaine, a certified forensic document examiner formerly of the Illinois State Police Forensic Lab, within the week. Dr. Fontaine's report, reference no, FD 2004-219, was completed in 8 business days. Her conclusion rendered across 23 pages of analysis, with a high degree of professional certainty. The signatures attributed to Diana Ortega Kane and Robert Ortega Kane on the document, dated September 14, 2021, were not produced by the individuals named. Not forgeries in a dramatic sense, not crude copies, skilled, careful, practiced reproductions. The kind you produce if you've been looking at someone's signature for 30 years. But wrong in a dozen tiny, measurable ways. That added up to one enormous conclusion. Patricia filed a petition to contest the will in Cook County Probate Court, case no. 234PR 07743, on March 2 ND. But that wasn't even the part that made my hands shake. The part that made my hands shake was what her paralegal found 3 days later when they pulled the notary records for the will's supposed execution date. The notary, public listed on the document, a woman named Carla Wyndham. Notary commission, no. Section 7 folio. Had her commission expire on August 9, 2021, 36 days before the date on the document. A legally notarized document, supposedly executed on September 14, 2020, bearing the stamp of a notary whose authority to notarize anything had lapsed over a month early. Either Carla Wyndham had notarized a document after her commission expired, which would void the document and expose her to criminal liability, or someone had used her stamp without her knowledge. Patricia Carla Wyndham, on a Tuesday afternoon. Carla Wyndham had no memory of notarizing any document for the Ortega Kane family. She hadn't been employed at the title company she'd worked for since mid-2021. She did not know how her stamp appeared on a will she had never seen. She agreed to provide a sworn affidavit. And here's what I need you to understand, because this is the part I didn't expect. When you start pulling one thread, the fabric doesn't just loosen. It comes apart in ways you couldn't have predicted. Stay with me. Because what happened next is the part that even Patricia called unusual. The discovery didn't stop at the will. When Patricia's team subpoenaed the business records from Ortega Cane Development Group as part of the estate proceedings, they found something that had nothing to do with the will and everything to do with why Marcus needed the estate to go cleanly in his direction. Between January 2009 and October 2003, a total of 847,000 had been transferred from the company's operating account to a limited liability company called Canfield Holdings, LLC, registered in Delaware, with Marcus listed as sole member. My father had never mentioned Canfield Holdings. My mother had never mentioned Canfield Holdings. The company had no website, no physical address, no discernible business purpose, and no contract with Ortega Cane Development Group. 804,000 over 4 years, in transfers that averaged just under 18,000, structured. Patricia told me quietly to stay beneath the dwarf-defying threshold that would have triggered a mandatory internal audit review under the company's own operating agreement. He knew the threshold, she said. He stayed under it every time. I sat in her office, and I thought about my brother at Christmas, every year, arriving in a new car. A 2020 Porsche Macan, a 2022 Range Rover autobiography. The lake house in Wisconsin he'd bought in 2021 that he said was a good investment. 47 minutes of silence in that conference room before I said, "What do we do with this?" Patricia said, "We turn it over to the right people, and then we let them do their jobs." On March 19th, Patricia referred the financial findings to the Commercial Fraud Unit of the Illinois Attorney General's Office and to the FBI's Chicago Field Office, Financial Crimes Division. On March 27th, Special Agent Dennis Colworth opened preliminary inquiry. No, FCPI 27 out was frozen by court order on April 3rd. The house on Elmwood Drive, the house where Marcus had handed me that cardboard box, was placed under a property preservation order the same day. I was sitting in a Panera Bread in Naperville when Patricia texted me the confirmation. I ordered a coffee I didn't drink and stared at the wall for a long time. I want to be clear about something before I describe what happened next. I did not do what I did for revenge. I want you to understand that, because I think when people hear a story like this, they imagine the wrong person fantasizing about the moment they get to watch everything collapse. They imagine someone marching in with a speech prepared. I didn't have a speech. I had a quiet, bone-deep exhaustion and a determination that had nothing to do with anger. I was done being erased. Patricia advised against direct confrontation. She was right. But the day Marcus was served with the will contest petition and the notice of the AG referral, April 7th, a Monday, he called me. He called 16 times between 9 a.m. and 11:15 a.m. I didn't answer any of them. At 11:10 a.m., he called from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up without thinking, "Vanessa." His voice was different. The preparation was gone. "Marcus, you don't understand what was happening. Dad was going to run the company into the ground. There were decisions being made. I was protecting. You forged their signatures." Silence. "You used a dead woman's notary stamp. You moved $847,000 out of Dad's company into an LLC you created in Delaware. And you handed me a box with 48 hours notice after our parents died." More silence. Then, very quietly, "After everything I did for this family." That line, "After everything I did for this family." I have thought about it many times since. It's the line people say when they've convinced themselves that taking something also constitutes giving something, when theft becomes, in their own internal accounting, a form of sacrifice. "I have the bank records, Marcus," I said. "The AG has the bank records? You have an attorney. I'd suggest you call them." I hung up. The formal proceedings were not dramatic in the way movies make them dramatic. There was no single courtroom moment where everything collapsed at once. It unfolded the way these things actually unfold, slowly, in increments, across conference rooms and filings and carefully worded statements. But there was one moment, April 21 Undi, a status hearing on the estate contest, probate court, Cook County. Judge Sandra Wild presiding. Marcus was there with his attorney, a partner at Brennan & Sloan named Jeffrey Aldrich. Jeffrey Aldrich wore good shoes and had the practiced calm of someone who had handled difficult situations many times. He was good at his job, but when Dr. Fontaine's report was entered into the record, all 23 pages, with its charts comparing stroke pressure and letter formation angles and baseline drift, I watched Jeffrey Aldrich read something on his legal pad that his client had apparently just written. He read it twice. He put the pad face down on the table. He asked for a recess. Marcus, sitting across the room, was staring at the document exhibit, not at me, not at Patricia. At the document. He looked, for the first time in my entire memory, Like a person who understood the full size of what they had done, I didn't feel satisfied. I want to be honest about that. I felt something closer to grief. The particular grief of watching someone you grew up with, someone who used to take you to school in the rain, become fully and finally unrecognizable. The will was voided by Judge Weil on May 6th under finding of fraud, pursuant to 755 ILCS 5:8. 1. The Illinois Probate Act provision governing fraudulent wills. Because my parents died without a valid will, their last legitimate will, which Patricia located at a prior estate attorney's office and which dated to 2015, split the estate equally between Marcus and me, the estate reverted to that earlier document. Half what it always should have been. Marcus was removed as executor the same day. A court-appointed administrator, a woman named Catherine Foss, took over management of the estate. The financial fraud charges are ongoing. As of the filming of this video, the matter is still before the AG's office, and the federal inquiry remains open. I can't speak to the specific charges that may or may not be filed. Patricia has been very clear with me about what I can and cannot say in that regard. What I can tell you is that the Canfield Holdings transfers had been fully documented, that Marcus's personal accounts were subject to a restraining order in April, and that the lake house in Wisconsin is currently the subject of a civil asset recovery motion. His reputation within the construction industry, where my father had spent 3 years building relationships, has been comprehensively altered. I've been told by 2 of my father's longtime business partners, separately and without coordination, that they terminated their relationships with Marcus in the spring. One of them, a man named Harold Siebert, who had worked with my father since 1994, called me in June. He didn't say much. He just said he was sorry. He hadn't paid closer attention, that he should have asked more questions. I told him my father would have said the same thing. It is now 14 months since Marcus handed me that cardboard box. I moved back to Denver in September. I'm in my own apartment. 3rd floor, east-facing windows, a view of the Flowerons, if you stand at a specific angle in the kitchen. I went back to my job. My colleagues were kind about the extended leave in a way I wasn't expecting and still haven't fully processed. The house on Elmwood Drive is in the process of being sold. Patricia tells me the paperwork should close in the next 60 days. I don't know what I'll do with my half of the proceeds. I know I won't make a fast decision. My father always said the mark of a good builder was that they didn't rush the foundation. I haven't spoken to Marcus since April 7th. I don't know what I will do if he tries to contact me again. I genuinely don't know the answer to that. Some things don't come with a clear answer. What has been hard, and I told you I would be honest about this, is the grief that doesn't have a clean object. I can grieve my parents. That grief is terrible and true, and I know how to hold it. But there is another grief underneath it, the grief for the version of my family I thought I had. For 30 years of memories that I now look at sideways, wondering which ones were real, and which ones were the performance of something that was never quite there. I grieve the version of my brother I thought I knew. The one who took me to school in the rain. The one who called me when he got his first apartment and sounded genuinely scared for the first time in his adult life. I don't know how much of that person was real. I don't know if the question even has an answer. I keep coming back to September 14, 2021, to whoever sat at a table and practiced my mother's handwriting until they could replicate it with enough consistency to fool a first glance. To the cold, methodical patience of that. To the fact that while they were doing that, I was in Denver, having a completely normal Tuesday, entirely unaware that my inheritance was being transferred out of existence. The worst betrayals are not dramatic. That is the thing no one tells you. The worst betrayals are patient. They happen in rooms you're not in. There's a woman named Rosario who works at the coffee shop on Colfax that I go to most mornings. She knows my order, medium dark roast, no room, 1 sugar, and she started asking me around October how things were going. Not in a polite way. In the way that means she actually wanted to know. I told her a version of this story over several weeks of short conversation. She listened the way some people listen, which is to say completely, with no visible calculation about what to say next. One morning she said, you know what my grandmother used to tell me? She said, the people who try to make you small are always more afraid of you than you know. I think about that a lot. The blah blah falls in line. In recognition of her relationship with the family, I think about that line too. Whoever wrote it, and I have my certainties about who wrote it, understood on some level that they needed to include me. That to leave me out entirely would look suspicious. So they left me in, just enough to explain me away, just enough to make me a footnote. The thing about footnotes is that they don't contest wills. They don't hire Patricia Nguyen. They don't ask why the notary stamp belonged to a woman whose commission had been expired for 5 weeks. The thing about footnotes is that they stay quiet. I didn't stay quiet. If you're watching this, and you're in your own version of this story, if you're in the middle of the part where you're still not sure if you're imagining it, still making excuses, still telling yourself that families are complicated, and maybe you're being unfair, I want you to say something to yourself that it took me a long time to be able to say. You are allowed to verify. You are allowed to ask the question. You are allowed to pull the thread. You are allowed to walk into an attorney's office with a birthday card and a personal check and say, something doesn't feel right, and let someone with the training to see what you can't see take a look. Trusting your instinct is not an act of aggression. It is an act of self-preservation. The people who needed you to stay small, and I mean this as plainly as I can say it, were always afraid of what you'd find if you looked closely. I looked closely. Some mornings I still wake up and forget, for just a second, that things are different now. I reach for the familiar weight of the grief and it's still there. It will always be there, but underneath it these days there is something else, something quieter and more durable. It took me a long time to name it. It's the feeling of knowing my own name is on my own life, that no one has moved it while I wasn't looking. That feeling is worth everything it costs. If this story meant something to you, not just as something to watch, but as something you needed to hear today, share it with one person. You probably already know who. And if you want to be here for the next one, subscribe. I'll be here.